March 15, 1943. 13:47 hours. Luftwaffe headquarters Karinhol, 40 kilometers north of Berlin. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, Knight's Cross recipient, and second only to Hitler himself, leaned back in his gilded chair and laughed. The intelligence report spread before him claimed American bomber production had reached impossible numbers. The Abwehr attaché in Lisbon reported that Boeing facilities in Seattle were producing heavy bombers at a rate that defied comprehension, one B-17 Flying Fortress every 3 hours. Propaganda. Göring dismissed with a wave adorned with jeweled rings. The Americans are masters of bluff and deception. His staff officers remained silent. The numbers were there in black and white. 20 bombers per day from Seattle alone, 30 more from Long Beach. The mathematics suggested America was producing more heavy bombers monthly than Germany's entire strategic bomber fleet. "I have personally inspected our aircraft factories," Göring announced. "I know what is required to build a heavy bomber. The tools alone take 6 months to manufacture. The skilled labor requires years to train. Each aircraft demands thousands of hours of precision work." He did not understand American industrial capacity. What Göring failed to grasp, what Nazi ideology prevented him from believing, was that American bomber production had already exceeded these impossible reports. At that exact moment, in a factory that hadn't existed 18 months earlier, workers were completing a B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. By year's end, American production would reach one heavy bomber every single hour, sustained around the clock 7 days per week. Within 6 months, Göring's dismissive laughter would transform into frantic orders that could never be fulfilled. The Luftwaffe would face an aerial armada so vast that German fighters could shoot down 100 bombers daily and still watch the formations grow larger. The mathematics of industrial warfare were about to be demonstrated with crushing finality above the Reich itself. German military doctrine had taught its leaders that strategic bombing required elite crews, precision-built aircraft, and years of preparation. The Luftwaffe's own strategic bomber program had been abandoned in 1937 because the resources required exceeded what the Reich could sustain. German industry could produce 300 to 400 bombers monthly by straining every factory. America would produce 8,000 heavy bombers in 1943 alone, not through superior German engineering improved, but through an industrial methodology that transformed bomber production from precision craftsmanship to assembly line manufacturing. Ford Motor Company would apply automobile production techniques to 4-engine bombers. Women who had never touched an aircraft would rivet fuselages. In 24 months, American bomber production would escalate from Göring's mocked impossibility to operational reality that rewrote strategic warfare. What Germany's most powerful military leader dismissed as propaganda would become the instrument of the Reich's destruction. The Luftwaffe had emerged from the First World War, convinced that tactical aviation, not strategic bombing, determined battlefield outcomes. General Walther Wever, the Luftwaffe's first chief of staff, had championed the development of the Ural bomber, a 4-engine strategic aircraft. His death in 1936 effectively ended German strategic bombing ambitions. German military planners calculated that each 4-engine heavy bomber required resources equivalent to 4 single-engine fighters. General Hans Schornick concluded in a 1940 memorandum that strategic bombing squadrons diverted resources from defensive fighter production without providing proportional battlefield advantage. Initial wartime operations confirmed German tactical doctrine. During the invasion of Poland in September 1939, Luftwaffe bombers destroyed Polish infrastructure in 36 days with minimal losses. The Battle of France further validated the approach. From May to June 1940, the Luftwaffe deployed 2,589 aircraft against Allied forces. France collapsed in 6 weeks. These victories embedded fatal assumptions. German commanders concluded that their tactical doctrine was superior, their production adequate, and their training sufficient. Strategic bombing fleets seemed unnecessary luxuries. Nazi racial ideology shaped every strategic assessment. Hitler's speeches consistently portrayed Americans as racially mixed, culturally decadent, and industrially inferior. At the 1942 Harvest Festival speech, Hitler declared, "America is a nation of millionaires, beauty queens, stupid records, and Hollywood. They know nothing of sacrifice or hardship." Göring reinforced this contempt in a 1941 address to aircraft factory workers. American bombers? I have seen their designs. Ugly, crude machines built by a nation that prioritizes comfort over combat effectiveness. Official Luftwaffe intelligence assessments dismissed American aviation as fundamentally inferior. Joseph Goebbels recorded in his diary, Roosevelt's America employs women in factories, Negroes in skilled positions, and Jews in laboratories. This mongrel workforce cannot produce weapons matching those of racially pure German craftsmen. This ideological certainty prevented accurate assessment of American capabilities. When intelligence reports contained accurate production figures, senior officers dismissed them as defeatist propaganda. The Abwehr provided accurate assessments of American production capacity, beginning in early 1942. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris submitted reports documenting the construction of massive aircraft plants across the United States. One March 1942 assessment stated, the Ford facility at Willow Run measures 3,500,000 square feet under a single roof. Assembly line extends 1 mile. Projected capacity, 500 four-engine bombers monthly from this single factory. Göring's response was dismissive. If the Americans can build 1 bomber per day from a single factory, I am a Jewish grandmother. When Oberst Josef Schmid attempted to present photographic reconnaissance of American aircraft factories in April 1942, Göring interrupted, "You show me buildings. Buildings are not aircraft. Until I see operational American bomber formations over Europe, I will not divert production capacity chasing phantom threats." Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, 49, First World War flying ace with 22 victories, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe since 1935. His personal wealth exceeded most European national treasuries. He believed American democracy made sustained military production impossible because workers could refuse dangerous assignments. General Feldmarschall Erhard Milch, 50, State Secretary of Aviation, former Lufthansa director who understood logistics. Unlike Göring, Milch comprehended industrial processes. He believed that German precision engineering provided qualitative superiority that would offset American quantitative advantages. Oberst Werner Baumbach, 31, Knight's Cross recipient, commander of KG 200, veteran of 274 combat missions. He believed that bomber crews required years of training to achieve mission success. Major Gunther Rahl, 25, fighter ace with 152 confirmed victories, squadron commander in JG-11, defending the Reich. He believed that properly trained German pilots in superior aircraft could defeat numerically larger forces. Dippling. Fritz Sander, 38, senior engineer at the Reich Air Ministry, graduate of Technical University of Munich. He understood the tooling, materials, and skilled labor required for aircraft production. His training emphasized that quality aircraft demanded skilled craftsmen working with precision tools. Feldwebel Hans Richter, 28, flight engineer in KG-54, veteran of 43 missions over England. Before conscription, he had worked as an automotive mechanic. He believed that German engineering produced more reliable equipment than enemy forces. August 17, 1943, 14:53 hours, 25,000 feet above Regensburg, Germany. Major Gunther Rahl rolled his Messerschmitt Bf-109 into position behind the American bomber formation. Through his reflector gun sight, he observed aircraft in their natural metal finish. The sun reflected blindingly off unpainted aluminum skin. Rahl had engaged American bombers before, but never formations of this scale. He counted aircraft by groups, 21 in the lead formation, another 18 slightly behind, a third formation, 23 bombers strong. Behind them, more formations extended to the horizon. Over 300 bombers were striking Regensburg and Schweinfurt simultaneously. Luftwaffe intelligence had predicted that America might field 150 to 200 heavy bombers for a maximum effort raid. Instead, 376 B-17s had taken off that morning. The Schweinfurt force contained another 230 bombers, over 600 four-engine heavy bombers committed to a single day's operations. Rahl attacked from below. His 20mm cannon rounds struck the bomber's waist section. He observed hits, saw pieces separate, but the B-17 remained in formation. Rahl broke away, diving below the formation. What troubled Rahl most was the implications. Each B-17 required approximately 400,000 man-hours to construct. His mental arithmetic suggested that fielding 600 bombers represented 240 million man-hours of production capacity. Germany's entire annual bomber production consumed roughly 180 million man-hours for all types combined. That evening, Hauptmann Wilhelm Herget noted, "We destroyed 60 of them, 60 confirmed. They sent 600. Roll replied quietly, "They lost 10%. Will they stop coming?" The question went unanswered. Feldwebel Hans Richter, flying reconnaissance duty that day, observed the American bomber stream from a distance. He had fought over England in 1940, when the Luftwaffe sent 300-400 bombers against British cities. The Reich had strained to maintain those formations. Richter wrote in his diary that night, "The Americans throw away aircraft like we discard shell casings. We shot down dozens. Tomorrow they will send more. Where do they come from?" The answer lay 4,000 miles away in a factory that hadn't existed when Richter had flown his first mission over London. September 6, 1943, Luftwaffe Intelligence Headquarters, Berlin. Oberst Werner Baumbach studied reconnaissance photographs spread across the conference table. August 17, Regensburg and Schweinfurt. August 19, Gilser Rheingen. August 24, Bordeaux. August 25, Warnemünde. September 6, Stuttgart. The pattern was undeniable. American 8th Air Force was conducting raids with 200-400 heavy bombers every 2 to 3 days. Each mission damaged 10 to 20% of aircraft participating. Sustaining current operations required replacing approximately 200 bombers monthly. "They cannot sustain this," Baumbach told his staff. "No nation possesses production capacity to replace 600 heavy bombers per month." Diplicking. Fritz Sander was summoned to provide technical analysis. He spread engineering specifications across a table. Each B-17 requires 65,000 individual parts. The Wright R-1820 engines, 4 per aircraft, take 1,800 man-hours each to assemble. The airframe requires 15,000 aluminum rivets installed by hand. Electrical systems contain 8 miles of wiring. He calculated on paper, using German production methodology. Each B-17 requires approximately 30,000 man-hours from start to finish. Monthly production of 600 bombers would require 750,000 workers dedicated exclusively to B-17 production. Baumbach interrupted. "Germany's entire aircraft industry employs 1.8 million workers producing all types. You're suggesting America has allocated half our total aviation workforce to a single bomber type?" "The mathematics are undeniable," Sander replied. Neither explanation was acceptable, but if American industrial capacity truly exceeded German capabilities by such margins, the strategic implications were catastrophic. The answer existed at Ford's Willow Run bomber plant, Ypsilanti Township, Michigan. Construction of Willow Run began in April 1941. The facility occupied 3,500,000 square feet under a single roof, making it the world's largest room. The main assembly line stretched 1.5 miles from fabrication to final assembly. Ford Motor Company had applied automobile production techniques to 4-engine bomber manufacturing. By September 1943, Willow Run employed 42,000 workers operating 3 shifts around the clock. The workforce included 11,000 women, 26% of the total. African Americans comprised 3,800 workers, 9% of the factory. Teenagers and those previously considered unsuitable for precision manufacturing assembled complex aircraft systems. The assembly line moved continuously. Every 63 minutes, a completed B-24 Liberator rolled out the factory doors. The process bore no resemblance to German aircraft production. At Willow Run, semi-skilled workers installed prefabricated sub-assemblies. Jigs and fixtures ensured proper alignment. Workers with 3 weeks of training performed tasks that required 3-year apprenticeships in German factories. Willow Run alone outproduced Germany's entire heavy bomber production capacity. The single factory exceeded the combined output of Heinkel, Dornier, Junkers and Focke-Wulf bomber plants. And Willow Run was only one facility. Boeing's Seattle plant produced B-17s at similar rates. Douglas Aircraft manufactured A-20 medium bombers. Consolidated's San Diego facility built additional B-24s. Combined American bomber production exceeded 8,000 four-engine heavy bombers in 1943. Germany produced 1,187 four-engine aircraft that year, primarily for maritime patrol rather than strategic bombing. Sander completed his calculations and stared at the results. His numbers suggested American production capacity exceeded German output by ratios of 7:1 for heavy bombers. Such disparity meant the war was already lost through industrial mathematics. He did not include this conclusion in his report. To state it would be defeatist. Sander revised his estimates, assuming American sources exaggerated by factors of 2 or 3. Even his conservative estimates showed ratios of 3:1, still strategically catastrophic. October 14, 1943, the day after Black Thursday. General Feldmarschall Erhard Milch entered Göring's office carrying loss reports. The second Schweinfurt raid had cost the Americans 60 B-17s shot down, with another 17 damaged beyond repair. Total losses: 77 heavy bombers, 650 aircrew killed or captured. Milch believed these numbers vindicated German defensive strategy. The Americans cannot sustain such losses. 10% attrition per mission means their bomber force will be destroyed within 10 missions. Göring immediately drafted a message to Hitler. Yesterday's victory demonstrates that American strategic bombing campaign has reached its culmination point. Enemy losses are unsustainable. What neither Göring nor Hitler grasped was that American bomber production had already replaced the losses before German radio announced the victory. Oberst Josef Schmid wrote a memorandum. American heavy bomber losses on 14 October 77 aircraft. Based on confirmed intelligence, these losses will be replaced within 96 hours. Current American production: 450 four-engine bombers monthly. Combat losses: approximately 180 monthly. Net increase in American bomber strength: 270 aircraft monthly. Conclusion: even at current attrition rates, American bomber forces will continue growing. Greifadre's response was brief. Schmid sees only problems, never solutions. His pessimism is noted. The memorandum was classified and filed. The fundamental problem was ideological. To accept Schmid's analysis required accepting that American industrial capacity exceeded German output by impossible ratios. Nazi propaganda had spent a decade teaching Germans that their racial superiority guaranteed industrial dominance. American society appeared chaotic from German perspective. Multiple races worked together. Women operated machinery. Jewish scientists contributed to weapons development. Nazi ideology insisted this democratic chaos made America industrially inferior. 3 months after Black Thursday, American bomber formations returned to Schweinfurt, this time escorted by long-range P-51 fighters. They struck with impunity. The factory district was destroyed. Göring blamed Fighter Command for failing to intercept. He demanded impossible production increases. He issued orders that, if followed, would have doubled fighter production through sheer willpower. Reality did not comply. German fighter production in late 1943 averaged 1,100 aircraft monthly. American fighter production that same period exceeded 4,000 monthly. December 20, 1943, Luftwaffe Technical Analysis Center, Rechlin, Germany. Dipplinging. Fritz Sander examined the B-17G that had made an emergency landing near Brunswick. The bomber, damaged but still flyable, had been forced down when its pilot became disoriented. The crew had destroyed classified equipment, but the aircraft itself remained intact. This was Sander's first opportunity to examine an American heavy bomber in detail. He approached with notebook in hand, determined to understand how Americans achieved their production rates. The nose glazing used flat panels rather than curved plexiglass German bombers employed. Flat panels were easier to manufacture, required simpler tooling, and could be produced by multiple contractors. The American approach sacrificed optimal aerodynamics for manufacturing simplicity. The instrument panel used standardized gauges with identical mounting configurations. German cockpits featured custom-designed instruments positioned for optimal pilot access. American standardization meant any gauge could be installed by semi-skilled workers following instructions. The electrical system used color-coded insulation and standardized connectors. A wiring diagram was stamped on a metal plate. German aircraft wiring required skilled electricians who understood the complete system. American wiring could be installed by workers following the diagram. Each engine was mounted on standardized mounts with identical bolt patterns. Oil lines and fuel lines used quick disconnect fittings. A trained crew could remove and replace an engine in 4 hours. German bomber engines required days to change. Every aspect of the B-17's design prioritized manufacturing speed over theoretical optimization. German engineering sought the most efficient solution to each problem. American engineering sought the solution that could be produced fastest by the least skilled workers. Sanders' report concluded, American heavy bomber design represents systematic application of mass production principles. Design sacrifices marginal performance improvements for manufacturing simplicity. Result: inferior aircraft produced in superior numbers. He calculated that using American production methods, German factories could theoretically increase bomber output by 60 to 70%. However, implementing these methods required abandoning traditional craftsmanship. Nazi ideology couldn't accept this. German superiority was foundational to the regime's legitimacy. Adopting enemy production methods meant acknowledging American superiority. Sanders' report was classified and filed. No changes were implemented. Meanwhile, at Willow Run, production had increased to 1 B-24 every 59 minutes. February 20, 1944. Operation Argument begins. The American 8th Air Force launched a coordinated campaign against German aircraft manufacturing facilities. Over 6 days, American and British bombers would fly 3,800 sorties. The objective was simple: destroy the factories producing fighters that defended the Reich. Major Gunther Rahl intercepted the first wave over Leipzig. Through his canopy, he observed a sight that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. The bomber formation stretched from horizon to horizon. Over 900 heavy bombers were striking aircraft factories simultaneously. The fighters escorting them extended even further. P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, and P-38 Lightnings outnumbered the bombers. External drop tanks extended the P-51's range to 1,650 miles. When the tanks emptied, pilots released them and fought with internal fuel. The empty tanks, each costing $200 to manufacture, fell into German-occupied territory. Americans built them faster than Germans could collect them. Rahl attacked and immediately drew fire from 6 P-51s. He was forced to break off. In his after-action report, enemy fighter escort presents insufficient strength to prevent bomber interception. Escorts outnumber us 3 to 1. Even if German fighters broke through, they faced bomber formations so large that destroying 20 bombers represented a fraction of the attacking force. On the ground, the bombing was catastrophic. The Messerschmitt factory at Riesmannberg suffered direct hits. High explosive bombs destroyed machine tools. The assembly buildings collapsed into rubble. Oberst Werner Baumbach toured the facility 3 days later. His report described devastation. Primary assembly building 80% destroyed. Machine tool damage exceeds 60%. Estimated production loss 280 to 320 fighters over next 3 months. Repair timeline, minimum 4 months. Similar reports arrived from Leipzig, Brunswick, Gotha, and Oschersleben. Every major aircraft factory in Germany had been struck. Combined production losses exceeded 1,400 fighters. The Americans had lost 226 heavy bombers during Big Week. Based on pre-war projections, such losses should have crippled the 8th Air Force for months. Instead, within 2 weeks, bomber formations returned at full strength. Feldwebel Hans Richter walked through the ruins of the Erler factory near Leipzig. The facility had produced 120 Bif 109s monthly. Now it was twisted wreckage. Most machine tools were damaged beyond repair. Richter wrote in his diary, "We are being systematically destroyed. They bomb our factories with impunity. We shoot down their bombers, they send more. Every raid costs them less than it costs us." At a workers' dormitory, Richter observed American leaflets that had been dropped with the bombs. One showed a photograph of the Willow Run plant with the caption in German, "This single American factory produces more bombers monthly than all German factories combined. We can replace our losses, you cannot." The leaflet was dismissed as propaganda, but the photograph was real. The strategic implications became undeniable. Erhard Milch presented production projections to Göring in early March. Fighter production before Big Week, 1,150 aircraft monthly. Current production 780 monthly. Projected production for April 650 monthly. American bomber raids continue with increasing frequency. Göring responded by demanding impossible increases. I need 2,000 fighters monthly. Find the workers, repair the tools, work around the clock. The directors tried to explain that workers without tools couldn't build aircraft. Göring dismissed their concerns as defeatism. By March 1944, American monthly bomber production exceeded 2,100 heavy bombers. German production of all bomber types, fewer than 200 aircraft monthly. The ratio had shifted from concerning to catastrophic. April 1944. Knowledge spreads through all German ranks. From Luftwaffe High Command to frontline mechanics, the truth could no longer be denied. American bomber formations appeared over Germany daily. The 8th Air Force launched missions with 500 bombers. When weather prevented operations over Germany, they struck targets in France. Hauptmann Wilhelm Herget attended a classified briefing, where intelligence officers presented comprehensive analysis of American production. The briefing included photographs from neutral sources, prisoner interrogations, and technical analysis. The intelligence officer began. American aircraft production in 1943, 85,946 aircraft of all types. This exceeds combined German, Japanese, and Italian production. American 1944 production is projected to exceed 96,000 aircraft. The briefing continued with factory-specific details. Willow Run 432 B-24s completed in March. Boeing Seattle 362 B-17s. Douglas Long Beach 389 A-20s. The numbers represented monthly output from individual facilities. Even fanatical officers couldn't dismiss the evidence. An SS political officer asked, "How is this possible? America employs women and Negroes in their factories." The intelligence officer replied carefully, "Enemy employment of non-traditional workers appears to provide production advantage. Women operate machinery. Racial minorities manage logistics systems. Their diversity increases available workforce without reducing quality." This challenged foundational Nazi ideology. The regime had excluded women from industrial work and claimed that democratic chaos made America weak. The evidence suggested the opposite. Letters home, despite censors, spread the truth. Feldwebel Hans Richter wrote to his wife, "The enemy has resources we cannot imagine. Their soldiers carry equipment that our officers lack. They waste more material daily than we receive monthly." His letter was intercepted and flagged as defeatist. By spring 1944, half the letters from the Western Front contained similar observations. A classified study prepared for the Armed Forces High Command concluded, based on current production ratios and loss rates, German military capacity will decline 15 to 20% monthly, while American capacity increases 8 to 10% monthly. Mathematical projection indicates military collapse within 12 to 18 months. The study was buried. Its conclusions were politically impossible. Captured American prisoners couldn't help even when they wanted to cooperate. A B-17 pilot shot down in May 1944 told his interrogators, "I don't know how many bombers we built. I just know there were always more. When our squadron lost aircraft, replacements arrived within days. We never wondered where they came from, because there were always more." This was more devastating than precise numbers. The Americans had achieved such production dominance that individual soldiers didn't track it. Abundance was assumed. Losses were irrelevant because replacement was automatic. Dr. Heinrich Schmidt, aviation psychologist, examined German aircrew stress responses. His confidential medical report documented industrial fatalism. Pilots and crews who fought competently but without hope. They knew they would eventually be killed through numerical superiority rather than enemy skill. By summer 1944, even Hitler had been informed. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, presented production figures. "The enemy outproduces us in every category: aircraft 5 to 1, trucks 15 to 1, petroleum 50 to 1. We cannot win through production." Hitler responded with rage, blaming factory managers and military commanders. He demanded miracle weapons that would change the strategic balance. He insisted that German quality would overcome enemy quantity. The strategic reality was simpler. America had demonstrated that modern warfare was won through industrial capacity. Quality mattered less than quantity. Training mattered less than replacement rates. June 6, 1944. Normandy, France. Feldwebel Hans Richter stood on the bluffs above Omaha Beach and observed an invasion fleet that stretched to the horizon. Through binoculars, he attempted to count vessels, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. The Allied naval force included 6,939 vessels. The armada represented more tonnage than the entire German navy possessed. Each vessel required months or years to build. The invasion fleet represented decades of production capacity committed to a single operation. Above the fleet, Allied aircraft dominated completely. Richter observed fighter patrols, bomber formations and reconnaissance aircraft operating without German interference. He wrote in his diary, "Today I witnessed the end of the war. Though it will take months more to complete, the enemy demonstrated production capacity that cannot be defeated. 6,000 ships, 10,000 aircraft, 1 million soldiers, all supplied across the English Channel. Within days, Allied forces had landed 326,547 men, 54,186 vehicles, and 104,428 tons of supplies. The supply flow increased daily. Each soldier required 30 to 40 pounds of supplies daily. The logistics chain delivered this material across the Channel through beaches and temporary harbours. American logistics doctrine assumed wastage. Supply officers delivered excess material, knowing that some would be lost or consumed inefficiently. German forces in Normandy rationed every supply category. Panzer divisions ran out of fuel within kilometres of objectives. Artillery battalions conserved ammunition. Infantry units collected ammunition from casualties because replacement supplies arrived irregularly. A German infantry platoon discovered an abandoned American supply dump near Saint-Eloi. The dump, destroyed by American forces before withdrawing, contained more food than the entire German battalion had received in 3 weeks. The gasoline destroyed at the site represented more fuel than the German 7th Army received that month. Allied air forces flew 14,674 sorties on D-Day alone. German response, 319 sorties. The ratio was 46.1. Major Günther Rall flew defensive missions over France. His after-action report described futility. Attempted interception of enemy fighter bombers. Enemy fighters present in overwhelming strength. Our formation of 16 aircraft engaged by estimated 60 to 80 enemy fighters, lost 11 of our aircraft. Mission objective not achieved. The kill ratio favored the Germans, but the Americans could sustain such ratios indefinitely. The Luftwaffe could not. By July 1944, the 8th Air Force could launch 1,000 bomber raids while simultaneously supporting ground operations in France. German production provided 700 to 900 fighters monthly. American bomber strength increased despite combat losses. General Feldmarschall Hugo Spell reported to Göring, "Enemy air superiority is absolute. Our fighters are overwhelmed by numerical superiority. I cannot defend the invasion beaches. I cannot protect German ground forces from air attack. The situation is hopeless." Göring blamed Sperl's leadership rather than addressing the production disparity. Sperl was relieved of command. General de Flieger Adolf Galland wrote in his combat diary, "We calculated that destroying American bomber formations faster than they could replace losses would win the air war. We were correct in theory but failed to understand American production capacity. They replace losses within days. We require weeks." Even fanatical officers couldn't ignore reality. SS Gruppenführer Sepp Dietrich reported to Hitler, "I need 100 tanks. The enemy destroys them as fast as they arrive. They have unlimited replacements. We do not. We cannot win." The war was mathematically over, though fighting would continue for 9 more months. September 3, 1944. General Feldmarschall Erhard Milch submitted his resignation as Inspector General of the Luftwaffe. His resignation letter stated, "American industrial superiority has rendered German air defense impossible. We cannot produce fighters fast enough to replace losses. We cannot train pilots fast enough to replace casualties. We cannot generate fuel sufficient to maintain operations. These deficiencies represent fundamental industrial capacity gaps that cannot be closed during wartime." General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland presented statistical analysis to Göring. Fighter pilot losses July-August 1944, 1,189 killed or missing. Replacement pilots received 876. Net loss 313 experienced pilots. American fighter pilot losses estimated 240. Replacements received estimated 950. Net gain 710 pilots. Mathematical projection indicates complete fighter force destruction by April 1945. Göring refused to forward the report to Hitler and relieved Galland of his position. Psychological impact was documented in medical reports. Luftwaffe medical officers reported Wehrmacht's complex, four-engine complex, a stress reaction induced by seeing massive American bomber formations. Pilots experienced trembling, nausea, panic attacks, refusal to fly. One report stated, "Patient has flown 147 missions without stress reaction. After witnessing formation of 800-plus enemy bombers, patient experienced acute anxiety and loss of motor control. Patient states, 'I cannot fight, there are too many, shooting them down makes no difference, I will die achieving nothing.'" Feldwebel Hans Richter was captured by American forces in September 1944. In captivity, he observed the logistics system. His diary recorded, "The American supply system is beyond comprehension. 3 meals daily. Hot food, coffee with every meal, medical care superior to what German soldiers received before the war. They discard equipment we would consider valuable." On October 14, 1944, exactly 1 year after Black Thursday, the 8th Air Force launched a mission with 1,551 heavy bombers. The Luftwaffe mounted maximum effort defense with 550 fighters. American losses, 37 bombers. German losses, 89 fighters. Each side lost similar numbers, but replacement timelines differed drastically. American bombers lost on October 14th were replaced by October 20th. German fighters would be replaced by November 20th if production and transportation allowed. On Christmas Day 1944, Luftwaffe mounted Operation Bodenplatte, a surprise attack on Allied airfields. The operation committed nearly 900 aircraft. German pilots destroyed or damaged 465 Allied aircraft but lost over 300 aircraft, with 237 pilots killed or captured. Tactically, the operation succeeded. Strategically, it was catastrophic. The Germans had traded their remaining experienced pilots for aircraft that the Allies replaced within a week. Allied strength on January 2, 1945, exceeded pre-Bodenplatte levels. German fighter strength never recovered. A captured major told his Allied captors, "We knew the attack would destroy us, but we attacked anyway. We had orders." The Americans lost 465 aircraft on Christmas. By New Year, you had more than before. We knew this. We attacked anyway, because waiting to die achieved nothing. The production numbers documented the industrial disparity that determined the conflict's outcome. American heavy bomber production, 1941, 1 145, 34,495, four-engine aircraft. This included 12,731 B-17s, 18,482 B-24s, and 3,970 B-29s. Peak monthly production reached 2,515 heavy bombers in March 1944. German heavy bomber production, 1941 to 1945. 1,169 four-engine aircraft. Peak monthly production, 47 bombers in August 1944. Production ratio 29.51 in America's favor. Total American aircraft production, all types, 324,750 aircraft. Total German aircraft production, 119,871 aircraft, ratio 2.71. American heavy bomber losses over Europe, 9,949 aircraft destroyed. This represented 28.8% of total production. German fighter losses defending the Reich, 26,000-plus aircraft destroyed, exceeding 80% of production. Cost of American heavy bomber program, $68 billion. Cost of German fighter defense program, approximately $22 billion. The Americans spent more, but their economy could sustain the expenditure. Strategic bombing shortened the war by an estimated 6 to 12 months. Every month the war continued cost 300,000 lives across all combatants. November 1978, United States Air Force Museum, Dayton, Ohio. General Feldmarschall A.D. Erhard Milch, now 86 years old, attended the dedication ceremony for a restored B-17G. He met Brigadier General James Smith, USAF retired, who had commanded a B-17 squadron during 1944. A reporter asked Milch what he thought when he first saw the scale of American bomber production. Milch answered, "We believed your production claims were propaganda. We laughed at reports that one factory produced a bomber every hour. We stopped laughing in late 1943 when your formations returned despite our victories." By 1944, we understood that American industry had mobilized on a scale that we could not match and could not survive. He paused, looking at the B-17. "You designed it for mass production. We designed for artistry. You trained semi-skilled workers to build thousands. We trained craftsmen to build hundreds. You accepted adequate quality in enormous quantities. We demanded perfect quality in limited numbers." General Smith responded, "We built them fast because we had to. Every week the war continued cost thousands of lives. We couldn't afford to spend months crafting perfect aircraft. We needed good enough aircraft in overwhelming numbers, delivered quickly." Milch nodded. "You understood industrial warfare better than we did." Hermann Göring believed that willpower could overcome material disadvantage. He was wrong. You proved that modern war is won in factories before soldiers fight battles. The conversation continued over dinner. Milch described German military culture's emphasis on individual excellence and qualitative superiority. American doctrine emphasized standardization, mass production, and quantitative advantage. Your system worked because American society already understood mass production, Milch observed. Henry Ford had taught you that standardized processes produce abundant products. You applied automobile production methods to bombers. German industry still operated on craft principles. We could not have adopted your methods even if we had understood their superiority. Smith agreed. We had advantages you couldn't replicate. Our industrial base was untouched by bombing. Our workers weren't starving. We could employ women and minorities without ideological contradiction. We had access to global resources. Milch's response was candid. The Nazi ideology prevented us from understanding reality. We believed racial purity produced superior workers. Your factories employed diverse workforces that outproduced ours. We believed women couldn't perform precision manufacturing. Your women built better bombers than our men. We believed democratic chaos made you weak. Your democracy mobilized more effectively than our dictatorship. I spent years in prison thinking about why we lost. The answer is simple. We were wrong about everything. Other German veterans who attended expressed similar sentiments. Hans Richter, who had immigrated to America in 1951, told the gathering, "I flew against your bombers over Germany. I thought you were foolish to risk 10-man crews in large aircraft. Then I came to America and saw the factories that built them. You could afford to lose bombers because you built more than we could shoot down. That was genius, not foolishness." Approximately 11,000 German POWs captured during the war chose to remain in America after 1945 rather than return to devastated Germany. They became American citizens and raised families. Their integration demonstrated that wartime enemies could become peacetime friends. The B-17 and other wartime bombers influenced post-war aviation development. The Boeing 707, first successful commercial jet airliner, descended directly from B-17 and B-29 design philosophy. Pressurized cabins, long-range fuel systems, and standardized components all traced to wartime bomber programs. Modern military logistics doctrine evolved from American World War II practices. The concept of overwhelming material superiority, rapid replacement of losses, and sustained operations through abundant supply became fundamental to U.S. military planning. Desert Storm in 1991 demonstrated these principles applied with precision weapons and air superiority. Museums across America preserve examples of wartime bombers. The National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton displays a B-17 and B-24. The Pima Air and Space Museum in Arizona maintains the largest collection of bombers. These aircraft serve as physical evidence of industrial mobilization that determined the war's outcome. Educational programs at these museums teach visitors about the home front contribution. The story of Rosie the Riveter, women who built bombers while men fought overseas, demonstrates that victory required total societal mobilization. The 11,000 women at Willow Run represented a social transformation as significant as the industrial achievement. Veterans' reunions continued through the 1990s as survivors aged. The 8th Air Force Historical Society organized annual gatherings where former bomber crews shared experiences. German veterans occasionally attended, facilitating reconciliation between former adversaries. These meetings acknowledged that soldiers on both sides had fought bravely, but one side possessed industrial advantages that made defeat inevitable. The philosophical lesson endured beyond the specific conflict. Hermann Göring began March 1943, believing that Nazi ideology and German military superiority guaranteed victory. He laughed at reports of American bomber production because accepting them required abandoning his worldview. By 1945, he sat in Nuremberg prison facing war crimes charges, his Luftwaffe destroyed, his ideology proven false. The P-47 Thunderbolt, B-17 Flying Fortress, and B-24 Liberator were not superior aircraft compared to German designs. The FW-190 fighter arguably performed better than early P-47 models. German engineering produced more elegant solutions to technical problems, but elegance and performance mattered less than availability. American aircraft appeared in numbers that overwhelmed qualitative advantages. The factories that produced them demonstrated democratic industrial power. Free workers producing standardized products outperformed slave labor and coerced craftsmen. Women and minorities contributing equally proved more effective than racial exclusion. Diverse teams collaborating freely generated more innovation than hierarchical command structures. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring began the war believing that one German was worth 10 enemies, that superior breeding produced superior soldiers, that will and courage determined outcomes. He ended the war understanding that industrial capacity, democratic mobilization, and mass production decided modern warfare. His laughter in March 1943, when presented with American production figures, became historical irony. The impossible production he mocked destroyed his air force, shattered his ideology, and proved that free societies at war possess strengths that dictatorships cannot comprehend until too late. German pilots and commanders who laughed at ungainly American bombers in 1942 stopped laughing by 1944. Those who survived learned that in industrial warfare, adequate weapons in overwhelming abundance defeat excellent weapons in limited quantities. The mathematics were inexorable. Production capacity determined victory. American factories employing women, minorities, and immigrants working freely outproduced German factories employing racially pure craftsmen working under compulsion. The lesson transcended the specific conflict. Totalitarian systems that suppress diversity, exclude capable workers based on ideology, and prioritize perfection over production will lose industrial wars against democratic societies that mobilize completely, employ talent regardless of background, and accept adequate quality at massive scale. Hermann Göring's laughter in 1943 symbolized the fatal overconfidence of dictatorships facing democratic industrial mobilization. By 1945, that laughter had been silenced by B-17s built every hour at factories he had dismissed as impossible.